Hello students, in the previous lecture we have gone through breathing, the types of respiratory organs, different definitions of the terms used in respiration and how energy is produced with the use of glucose, oxygen, that we have done. Today in this lecture we are going to do about the exchange of gases. Now main site for exchange of gases are the alveoli. Now, can you think which process is involved in exchange of gases between blood and tissues? It is by simple diffusion, which is based on pressure or concentration gradient. Pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called as partial pressure. Now, for oxygen it is called as partial pressure of oxygen, and for carbon dioxide it is partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Now, observe the data which I have just shown you. What do we infer? That this data represents a concentration gradient for oxygen from alveoli to blood and blood to tissues. You know that the solubility of carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times higher than that of oxygen. Now, can you tell me the reason? It is because of this fact that the amount of carbon dioxide that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher as compared to that of oxygen. What is the composition of diffusion membrane? The diffusion membrane is made up of three layers. One is squamous epithelium, the second is endothelium of alveolar capillaries, the third is the basement substance in between. You can see this in the diagram here. So, by now you must have understood that all the factors in our body are favorable for diffusion of oxygen from alveoli to tissues and that of carbon dioxide from tissues to alveoli. After exchange of gases, we will now discuss about the transport of gases, that is oxygen and carbon dioxide, how they are transported. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are transported by blood. About 97% of oxygen is transported by RBCs in the blood. Now, what about the rest 3%? That remaining 3% is carried in a dissolved state through plasma. Similarly, about 70% of carbon dioxide is carried as bicarbonate and 20 to 25% is transported by RBCs. The remaining 5 to 7% of carbon dioxide is carried through plasma in a dissolved state. Now, first we will discuss about mechanism of transport of oxygen, but before that I will explain about hemoglobin, which is carrier for oxygen molecule. Now, hemoglobin is a red color iron pigment present in the red blood cells. Oxygen can bind hemoglobin in a reversible manner to form oxyhemoglobin. So, this is the structure of hemoglobin. Now, partial pressure of oxygen is an important factor for bonding of oxygen with hemoglobin. Which other factors do you think might be responsible for binding of oxygen with hemoglobin? They are partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion concentration and temperature. When percentage of saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against partial pressure of carbon dioxide, a sigmoid curve is obtained, which is called as oxygen dissociation curve. So, this is the oxygen dissociation curve. You must understand that in alveoli there is a high partial pressure of oxygen, low partial pressure of carbon dioxide and lesser hydrogen ion concentration and lower temperature. All these factors, they are favorable for the formation of oxyhemoglobin. But in tissues all the conditions are reverse, that is low partial pressure of oxygen, high partial pressure carbon dioxide and more hydrogen ion concentration. So, what outcome you expect there? Dissociation of oxygen from oxyhemoglobin. Now, this indicates that oxygen gets bound to hemoglobin in lung surface and gets dissociated at the tissues. Now, you must remember a fact that every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver around 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues under normal physiological conditions. Now, let us discuss about transport of oxygen and transport of carbon dioxide. Again, a physiological fact to remember: every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 ml of carbon dioxide to the alveoli. Now, let us go through the dissociation curve, oxygen dissociation curve of hemoglobin. It is very important. So, we can compare the oxygen dissociation curve to the curve we would see if hemoglobin reaches saturation at the same partial pressure of oxygen, but without increasing affinity. The sigmoid dissociation curve means that at low partial pressure of oxygen, hemoglobin binds oxygen less readily than expected. So, let us go more readily than expected. The extra oxygen delivered is shown by a blue arrow in the graph. The Bohr effect. Now, the formation of hemoglobinic acid means that in the presence of high carbon dioxide concentrations, the dissociation curve shifts to the right, a reduction in affinity for oxygen, and this is called as Bohr effect. Now, the Bohr effect means that hemoglobin will load more easily in the pulmonary capillaries and unload more easily in the tissues capillary. Now, Bohr effect represents the effect of partial pressure of carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion on the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. At tissues, increased partial pressure of carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion concentration, there is shift of oxygen hemoglobin curve to the right, and at lungs, decreased partial pressure of carbon dioxide plus hydrogen ion concentration shifts of oxygen hemoglobin curve to the left. So, Bohr's effect facilitates oxygen release from hemoglobin at tissues and oxygen uptake by hemoglobin at lungs. Now, chloride shift, this is also known as Hamburger shift or Hamburger phenomena. It is a process which occurs in cardiovascular system and refers to the exchange of bicarbonates and chloride across the membrane of red blood cells. Now, Haldane effect. Haldane effect results from the fact that combination of oxygen with hemoglobin causes hemoglobin to be a stronger acid, thus displaces carbon dioxide. So, you can see in the diagram the blood capillaries and the lungs. Now, regulation of respiration. Respiration is under neural as well as chemical control. First, we will discuss about the neural control. To understand neural control, we must understand the structure of brain. You can see the structure of pons and medulla. Now, human beings, they have a significant ability to maintain and moderate the respiratory rhythm according to the demands of body tissues. Now, there is a specialized center present in medulla region which is called as pons. You can see in the diagram. Now, factors affecting respiratory centers. So, there are various factors, out of which first one is impulses from higher centers. Impulses from higher centers can stimulate or inhibit respiratory centers directly. Secondly, impulses from stretch receptors of lungs. Now, we will discuss about some of the respiratory disorders. Some of them are like asthma, bronchitis, emphysema, cystic fibrosis, tuberculosis and sleep apnea. Now, classification of diseases can be like infectious diseases, in which upper respiratory tract infections like the common cold and sinusitis, the lower respiratory tract infection which includes the respiratory syncytial viruses, tuberculosis, pneumonia, cough. Second is obstructive lung diseases like the lung cancer and asthma, and the third are chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases which are usually called as COPD, which includes emphysema and bronchitis. Now, let us discuss little bit about these diseases. Asthma, this is a chronic respiratory condition caused by consistent inflammation of the airways. Symptoms include lung spasm with wheezing and shortness of breath. COPD is an umbrella term that encompasses several respiratory illnesses that cause breathlessness or the inability to exhale normally. So, this is how COPD, the structure of the alveoli, the normal alveoli and person suffering from emphysema. Now, this respiratory disease is caused by smoking, genetics and environment factors like pollution. Then we come to bronchitis. It is a respiratory disease of bronchitis which is divided into chronic and aquatic bronchitis. Chronic bronchitis is a form of COPD that is emphasized by a chronic cough. Acute bronchitis is an infection caused by a virus. In both the cases, the mucous membrane in the lungs becomes inflamed in the bronchial passage. This causes swelling that shuts off the airways in the lungs. So, this is the diagram of a normal person and a person suffering from chronic bronchitis. You can see the shrunk air pathway. Now, emphysema, this serious respiratory disease is another form of COPD, and according to the American Lung Association, the most common cause is smoking. Those who suffer from emphysema have trouble exhaling air from their lungs. Cigarette smoke damages the air sacs in the lungs to a point where they can no longer repair themselves. Emphysema evolves slowly over the years and there is no cure. However, those who quit smoking are more likely to see the disease's progression slow. Now, this cancer is the leading cause of death for men and women in the United States. With the ability to develop in any part of the lungs, it is hard to detect. Most often the cancer develops in the main part of the lungs near the air sacs. DNA mutations in the lungs causes irregular cells to multiply and creates an uncontrolled growth of abnormal cells or a tumor. These tumors interfere with the regular function of the lungs. Symptoms can take years to appear, but include things like chronic coughing, changes in voice, harsh breathing sounds, coughing up blood and many others. So, this is the diagram showing the alveoli with emphysema and the normal alveoli. Cystic fibrosis, this genetic respiratory disease is caused by a defective gene that creates thick and sticky mucus. This mucus causes repeated and dangerous lung infection as well as obstructions in the pancreas that prevent important enzymes from breaking down nutrients for the body. So, this is the diagram showing cystic fibrosis, the thick sticky mucus which is blocking the pancreatic and bile duct. Then another disease is pneumonia. This lung disease is caused by an infection in the air sacs in the lungs. The infection can be caused by bacteria, virus or a fungi. Symptoms which include cough, fever, shaking, chills and shortness of breath can range from mild to severe. So, healthy airway you can see in the diagram, and a person with suffering from pneumonia, there may be mucus or swelling which may narrow the airway, decreasing the airflow. Now, suggested ways to prevent developing this respiratory condition includes washing hands frequently, getting a flu shot, or those at high risk of pneumonia receive vaccination. Another disease is allergies. This condition is one of the most common chronic problems worldwide. Allergies occur when the immune system mistakes a common substance as an invader. The most common culprit of allergic reactions are pollen, dust, food, insect stings, animal, mold, medication and latex often affect the nose, lungs, throat and sinuses. So, these are the allergens. Now, common culprit is smoking. Cigarette smoking is either a cause or an exacerbate of every respiratory disease on this list. Now, smoking is the leading cause of preventable illness and death and produces 4,43,000 deaths a year, around 4,90,000 of which are caused by second hand smoke. So, we have to prevent. So, I think you must have followed the topic which we have done just now, the exchange of gases. So, how oxygen and hemoglobin they combine and then their dissociation occurs, and how the exchange of gases occurs from in the lungs and in the tissues. And then we have dealt about the sigmoid curve, the Bohr effect, the chloride shift, and then some of the respiratory disorders, why they occur and how we can prevent them. So, that is all. Thank you.